The rain had not stopped since morning, and Elena Marsh stood at the iron gates of Ashworth Manor, with a wet suitcase and a heart full of worry. She looked up at the huge gray stone house. It looked cold, just like everyone in the village had warned her it would be. "They say the Duke fired 4 maids in the last 2 months, the coachman had told her on the way. Nobody lasts. Elena did not have the luxury of choosing a kinder job. Her mother was sick, and the medicine cost more money than Elena had ever seen. She needed this position, no matter how difficult the man inside might be. A tall woman with gray hair opened the door before Elena could knock. This was Mrs. Whitfield, the housekeeper, a woman with tired eyes and a stiff back. "You must be the new girl," Mrs. Whitfield said, looking Elena up and down. "Come in before you catch a cold. But I warn you now, His Grace is not an easy man to work for. He has little patience and less kindness. Do your work well, and stay out of his way." Elena nodded and followed her inside. The next morning, Elena was given a stack of old ledgers and told to bring them to the library for the Duke's review. Her hands trembled slightly as she knocked on the heavy wooden door. "Enter," came a deep voice from inside. Elena stepped into a room lined with books from floor to ceiling. Behind a large desk sat Duke Julian Ashworth, a man with sharp eyes and an even sharper expression. He did not look up right away, and when he finally did, his gaze was cold enough to make Elena's fingers tighten around the ledgers. "You're the new maid," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, Your Grace. Elena Marsh." He stood and walked around the desk, taking the ledgers from her hands without a word of thanks. He flipped through a few pages, frowning. "These numbers are not in order. Did no one teach you how to arrange records?" Elena felt her face grow warm with embarrassment, though the mess was not her doing. "I was told to bring them to you as they were, Your Grace. I have not yet had the chance to organize them." He studied her for a long moment, as if deciding whether she was telling the truth. "You have 1 week," he said finally. "If you cannot meet the standards of this household by Friday, do not bother unpacking the rest of your things. I have no patience for maids who cannot keep up." Elena's throat tightened, but she lifted her chin. "Understood, Your Grace." He turned back to his desk without another word, and Elena left the library with her heart pounding. She had 1 week to prove herself in a house that had already broken 4 other women before her. That first day, Elena worked harder than she ever had in her life. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached, polished silver until her fingers cramped, and memorized the names of every room in the enormous house. By evening, she was exhausted, but she refused to let it show. On Tuesday, Elena was assigned to help in the study, where the household accounts were kept. As she dusted the shelves, she noticed something strange in the numbers laid out on the desk, a discrepancy in the payments made to a local merchant. Curious, and perhaps a little too bold for a new maid, she looked closer and realized the estate manager had been quietly overcharging the household for months. She was nervous to say anything, fearing it was not her place, but she also could not stay silent when something felt wrong. That evening, she gathered her courage and brought the matter to Julian's attention, showing him the numbers with a shaking hand. He studied the papers she offered, his frown deepening as he understood what she was showing him. "Where did you learn to read accounts like this?" "My father was a shopkeeper before he passed," Elena said quietly. "He taught me numbers before I could properly write my own name." Julian said nothing for a long moment, simply looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "I will look into this," he said finally. "You may go." Elena left the room unsure if she had helped herself or made things worse. But the next day, the estate manager was quietly dismissed, and Julian said nothing more about it. Still, Elena noticed something had shifted, however small. He watched her a little longer when she entered a room. He asked her opinion once or twice on small matters, though he always seemed almost annoyed with himself for doing so. On Wednesday, Elena was crossing the courtyard when she heard crying near the stables. She found a young stable boy named Tommy sitting against the wall, tears streaking his dirty face. He had accidentally let one of the Duke's finest horses loose, and it had run off toward the woods. "He will dismiss me," Tommy said between sobs. "My family needs the money I send home." Elena knelt beside him, her own worries about her mother rising in her chest. She understood too well what it meant to fear losing everything. "We will find the horse together," she said gently. Do not give up before we have even tried. They searched the woods for nearly 2 hours before finding the horse calmly eating grass near a stream. By the time they returned, both Elena and Tommy were soaked and covered in mud, but the horse was safe. Unknown to Elena, Julian had been standing at his window that entire time, watching the two of them return across the field, laughing despite their exhaustion. Something about the sight stayed with him longer than he expected. That night, Elena could not sleep. She wandered down to the library, hoping to borrow a book to calm her mind. She did not expect to find Julian there, sitting by the fire with a glass of untouched wine and a distant look in his eyes. "I apologize, Your Grace," she said quickly, turning to leave. "I did not know you were here." "Stay," he said, surprising them both, "since you have already disturbed my solitude." Elena hesitated, then stepped further into the room, her eyes drawn to the shelves of books. "I only wished to borrow something to read. I could not sleep." "What do you read?" he asked, gesturing for her to sit across from him. She sat carefully, unsure of the boundaries of this strange moment. Anything, truly. "My father did not have many books, so I read whatever I could find. Old poetry, stories about faraway places I will likely never see." For the first time since Elena had arrived, something like warmth flickered across Julian's face. They spoke for nearly an hour about a novel he had recently read, disagreeing gently on whether the main character had made the right choice in the end. Elena found herself forgetting, for a little while, that she was speaking to the Duke who had threatened to dismiss her within a week. He seemed, in that firelight, like simply a man who was tired and a little lonely. As the days passed, Elena noticed small details about Julian that others in the household seemed to have stopped seeing. He ate dinner alone every night in a dining room built for 20 guests. A portrait of the late Duke hung in the hallway, turned to face the wall instead of the room, as though someone could not bear to look at it. The servants spoke in hushed voices whenever the previous Duke's name came up, and Julian's jaw would tighten every time. Elena began to understand that his coldness was not cruelty. It was armor, built carefully over years, protecting something wounded underneath. On Thursday night, a storm rolled over the countryside, knocking out the lights across the manor. Thunder shook the windows, and the household scrambled to light candles and secure the shutters. Lena worked alongside the other staff, carrying candles through dark hallways, until she found herself alone with Julian in the study, the fire the only light in the room. "You do not need to help with this," he said, watching her light another candle. "This is not the work of a maid." "I would rather be useful than sit idle during a storm," she replied. He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "My father died in a storm much like this one," he said finally. "I was supposed to be with him that night. I chose to stay in town instead, at a gathering I did not even wish to attend. By the time I returned, it was too late." Elena set down the candle she was holding and sat across from him, saying nothing, simply letting him speak. "Everyone believes I run this house with a cold heart, because I care for nothing," he continued. "The truth is, I am afraid of caring for anything at all. Every person I have loved has left me in one way or another. My mother when I was young, my father in that storm. I decided long ago it was easier to keep people at a distance before they could leave me first." Elena's chest ached at his words. "I understand that fear more than you might think," she said softly. "When my father died, my mother and I had nothing. I have spent years afraid to hope for anything, because hope has a way of being taken from you." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and for a moment, neither spoke. The rain continued outside, but inside that study, something quiet and honest passed between them, something neither was ready to name. "Why did you give me only 1 week?" Elena finally asked. Julian looked away, almost embarrassed. "Because I expected you to fail, like the others. It was easier that way. If I dismissed you quickly, I would not have to see you long enough to care." "And now?" Elena asked, before she could stop herself. He did not answer right away, and Elena, suddenly aware of how close their conversation had drifted to something far more personal than employer and maid, stood quickly. "It is late, Your Grace. I should return to my room." She left before he could respond, her heart racing the entire way up the stairs. Friday morning arrived gray and quiet. the storm having passed in the night. Elena woke with a heavy heart. She was certain that whatever had passed between them the night before had been a mistake, a moment of weakness brought on by candlelight and thunder. Surely today, Julian would remember his position and hers, and send her away as he had promised. Rather than wait to be dismissed, Elena decided she would leave with whatever dignity she had left. She packed her small suitcase, wrote a short note thanking Mrs. Whitfield for her patience, and made her way toward the front gates before the household had fully woken. She had barely reached the edge of the courtyard when she heard footsteps hurrying behind her. "Elena, wait!" She turned to see Julian standing there, out of breath, her folded note in his hand. He must have found it on the hallway table where she had left it for Mrs. Whitfield. "Where are you going?" he asked. "You said I had 1 week," Elena said, her voice trembling despite her effort to remain calm. "It is Friday. I assumed you would rather I leave on my own than force you to send me away." Julian shook his head slowly. "That is not why I am here." He stepped closer, and for the first time since she had met him, his eyes were not cold or distant. They were open, almost vulnerable. "The 1 week was never truly about your work," he admitted. "It was a wall I built, because I was terrified of what might happen if someone stayed long enough to matter to me. I have spent years pushing people away before they could leave first. But you did not simply meet my impossible standard, Elena. You saw past the walls I built around this house, and around myself, and I do not wish for you to walk out that gate." Elena's suitcase nearly slipped from her fingers. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I do not want you to leave," Julian said, his voice steady now. "Not as a maid I am choosing to keep on staff, but as someone I have come to care for far more than I ever expected to allow myself. Stay, Elena. Not because you fear losing this position, but because I am asking you to." For a long moment, Elena said nothing, searching his face for any trace of doubt. She found none. "I was so certain you would send me away," she whispered. "I very nearly let my fear do exactly that," Julian admitted, "but I could not let you walk through that gate without telling you the truth." Elena set down her suitcase, and something in her chest, tight with worry since the moment she had arrived, finally began to ease. That evening, for the first time since Elena had come to Ashworth Manor, the portrait of the late Duke was turned to face the room again, hung with quiet care by Julian's own hands. The dining room, once so empty and silent, held the soft sound of 2 voices speaking gently over dinner. Elena Marsh had arrived at Ashworth Manor with nothing but a wet suitcase and a desperate need for work. She left that Friday morning, intending to disappear quietly from a house too grand and a man too guarded for someone like her. Instead, she found a home she never expected, and a man who, after years of keeping everyone at a distance, finally let someone stay.